Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 14.22 top lane tier list. So for content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. This was a huge patch. We saw the release of a new champion. Ambessa has been released to the game. This has definitely shifted some things up. We've also seen nerfs towards 3 of the 4 most popular low elo picks. Mordekaiser took a tag on his E, Jax took a tag on his ultimate, Aatrox also took a tag on his ultimate. Then we saw some other nerfs and buffs in between. Shen is another pretty big one. He took a bit of a tag this patch. And then we saw a shake up towards Warwick and a general buff towards Swain, who is definitely seeing a bit more play in the top lane at the moment. But let's cover all the changes. So the D tier is going to consist of slightly different champions this patch. In fact, mostly just moving out of the D tier. Smolder and Yasuo are the 2 champions which maintain their spot. In Smolder's case, he's been a relatively weak top laner for a while. You're not really going to see this champion outside of being in R5 towards tank matchups. And overall, for like a low to mid elo pick, it's just not something I'd really recommend. You're not really going to be thinking so much about those counter pick scenarios. Actually, now that I mention it, I'm going to be doing an elite top lane tier list for tomorrow, I believe, actually, where I'll cover a bit more in depth some of the matchup dynamics between a lot of picks, but here I'll cover the basics and why I've put some of the champions where they are. Let's continue. Yasuo, obviously, Yuntao's took a big adjustment this patch. It looks to have landed relatively weak. Maybe for range champions, it seems to be a bit more in an okay spot, especially for the likes of Jinx. But for your melees, the likes of Yasuo, Yone, it looks to just be slightly on the weaker side at the moment. It is gaining more play rate as we go on, and you could argue that it's going to be a slight shift up in playstyle from the familiarity of Bork. You're not going to have that sustain which Bork provides you with, and that is definitely hurt Yasuo a bit. Obviously, you can still go Bork, and he's still going to be an okay pick until as like a counter towards some of those ranged matchups. Outside of that, you're not really going to play him maybe like a mid to top lane flex option if you so desire it. Rumble got worth this patch. It didn't really do much. It was base HP. It helps him more in elite. Didn't really do anything for low elo. I think it was the wrong thing to buff about Rumble. I would have rather have seen something like a health growth buff. But this is the direction they've taken. Obviously, if they still want him to be solid option in elite, that is where he tends to have more of his audience. So he still maintains a spot in the D tier for the average player base. Moving out of the D tier, we have Swain and we have Vayne. In Swain's case, he's going to actually make a bigger jump, so I'll talk about him in a second. But Vayne moves up to the C tier. It's like a low C tier option. She's like Smolder, but slightly better early on into the game, you could say. Not going to have the same level of AoE pressure, but is once again going to be that marksman option into some of those melee matchups where you can really utilize your range and your spacing capability. Overall, you're not going to really see these picks as much within mid and low elo. They're just not going to be, you're going to struggle a lot more on these kind of options. You're going to get punished a lot more aggressively, and that can definitely really hurt you and your ability to climb. So they're not picks I'm really going to recommend you look for, especially if you're just looking to climb generalistically. Sejuani and Varus I'm adding to the C tier. In Varus' case, he gained W damage this patch. He gained 3 at all ranks. It's a nice buff for top lane. I think he's a fine pick if you're comfortable on him. If you're not comfortable on playing Varus, he's the kind of pick which I have him on here. He's still the kind of pick you're not really going to go towards. In Sejuani's case, she can actually abuse some of the good tank items at the moment. I think Unending Despair, I think, sits as the top spot for tank item options. Winter's Approach didn't get nerfed, so it's still a very solid option. She can utilize both these items quite well. Abyssal Mask can be something you opt into, although Sejuani's damage is mostly physical. You can opt into a heart still. It's definitely going to be a lot better within mid and low elo, where you're more comfortably going to be able to stack it up. The games are going to go a bit longer, but she can function. It's not something I'd hugely recommend. I think there are loads of better tank options available to you at the moment. But if you like Sejuani, you like the kind of like mana flow, Scorch, secondary tree, ignite, and playing a bit more aggressive, then it's definitely something you have the option to go to. So Sejuani going to sit within my C tier for the moment. Cassante probably should drop to the D tier. I am going to drop him to the D tier. I think when it comes to this pick, he's obviously very elite skewed. He's more early game skewed as well now. They try to push him more towards that with the adjustments which they made back along. I think actually 2 of their most recent reworks, the one towards Cassante and Swain, I'd argue are failures. They don't really fix the problems with these champions, and in fact, now that I've played both, they both feel kind of worse compared to the previous iterations. So in my opinion, I think they're both failures. Obviously, you're entitled to your own opinion. But I think, yeah, from my perspective, they really miss out on what should have been a home run in a lot of these situations. Because in this case, he drops down to the D tier. It was a simple enough towards his Q, 10 flat damage off at all ranks. But he probably should have been here in the first place. He is obviously a very elite skewed pick. Vladimir still struggles at the moment. He still sits as a C2 option. I mean, most people have already moved off the Grasp W Max variant. Obviously, that gained a lot of popularity really quickly. They nerfed it, and it lost a lot of popularity. He still struggles, though. He still sits as a C2 option, probably like a mid to high end C tier option, though. Quinn and Gwen wrap up the 2 champions which remain in the C tier. In Gwen's case, they pretty aggressively went after her AP ratio on passive. She's also pretty elite skewed at this point, and that definitely does hurt her, especially because I know a lot of people who are relatively mid or low elo and new to the game want to pick up this champion, as she's quite an inviting option. She's a cool kind of character design, and yeah, she's in a pretty rough spot at the moment. Especially what you notice with a lot of these picks is champions with attack speed steroids or auto spacing steroids or attack range bonuses actually tend to be pretty elite skewed, as it makes more value out of a different skill compared to just obviously landing abilities, and it relies a lot more on clicking effectively, which you're not really going to see people do as much in mid and low elo. So yeah, she definitely does struggle a lot more there at the moment. In Quinn's case, this champion just doesn't feel correct for the game anymore. I think Quinn's been in a pretty awkward spot for a while now. It's hard to really buff this champion, otherwise it becomes very obnoxious and can be very frustrating for a lot of people to play against. But then it's been in a pretty bad spot for a while now. I think it probably deserves a rework of some sort. What can they do for the champion? I don't really know. And I think that really does put it in a pretty tough spot at the moment. The build variations look to be something like Profane Hydras, Stride Breakers. You have more standard crit variations. Overall, it comes down to what you feel comfortable with within the game. Do you need that lethality burst potential with an electrocute variation? Do you want to be a more sustained auto attacker? Then you could opt into things like Bork and your crit variants, but overall Quinn in a pretty other spot at the moment, sits as more like a C tier option. I'm actually going to be dropping 2 of my more elite skewed picks from a B tier down. We're going to be moving Yone down. He has obviously been tagged himself, combined with a Bork nerf in the previous patch. Yoon Tao's once again looks to still be on a relatively weak side. It'll probably get buffed in 14.23, maybe for melee specifically, in which case he should definitely benefit from that. But yeah, Yone going to drop down to the C tier now, and in Fiora's case, she obviously is very elite skewed. I mean, this one's a pretty relatively well-known thing. This champion very much relies on precisely utilizing the effectiveness of her kit, making use of the full value of parry, and oftentimes that can just be utilizing the slow and the chase down potential of it, or it can just be utilizing the full extent of this champion's kit. Overall, she just dropped down to the C tier for the moment, especially for more general audiences. Moving on to the B tier then, Maokai is a champion I'm gonna move up. Just to add on to the tier list. In fact, I don't think I had Maokai last patch. The thing with Maokai is he was really good in the top lane for a while, really underrated. Then he got indirectly nerfed because of his support power and his jungle power for a bit. He got buffed in this patch, and that has once again kind of enabled him to be kind of viable here as an option. I don't think he's quite an A tier or an S tier tank. I think he sits as more like a B tier niche option, where if someone blinds Jax, for example, and you're kind of looking for an option, like a tank option, then Maokai could definitely be something you look towards. I think it definitely can function quite well in that matchup. Obviously, if you play Gragas, then you're probably going to go Gragas, but yeah, Maokai is definitely something there for you, and I think he can be more broadly played with the buffs he received this patch. Pantheon, I don't like this champion in its current state. I actually don't really like a lot of the champions which are forced to rush Eclipse. It feels really bad, as this item does stunt you from oftentimes getting some of the items which you desire a bit more, but then you feel pretty bad if you don't get Eclipse, because you often can feel quite quite stunted on like like sitting on a cleaver, for example, as Pantheon, especially into like specific matchups where you'd rather just have the AD and the haste from Eclipse and like the item online a bit earlier. Overall, it's not a huge fan of where the champion is at the moment. Probably deserves a bit of a buff. I'd say he sits as more like a mid to low B tier option. Camille sits as a low B tier option, obviously very elite skewed. Has had a lot of power siphoned off of her in 14.21. They went after the R on hit, the W base damage, and they took some of the AD ratio away from the E. And overall, that just dropped her down a bit. She's a bit weaker now, so she sits as more like a low B tier option. Akali seems to be doing a bit better in the top lane at the moment, so it's something to be aware of. If you enjoy Akali, then you can definitely pick her a bit more frequently up here. Is it something I'd recommend going to or learning if you're a top laner? Probably not. You don't really need to learn this champion for mid and low elo. It's more like a flex option. Maybe your mid laner plays Akali and you feel comfortable like picking up the champion and learning it. Or you play some mid lane and you kind of want to flex it between both roles. That is also an option for you. Overall, I think she sits as like a high B tier option in her current state. Aurelia is going to move up, so I won't talk about Aurelia yet. Gangplank. Honestly, also his high beta option. The buffs to him in 14.21 really did help him quite a bit. I think this champion's very good and elite, borderline like an S tier option. For more average players, I think he's definitely a bit more approachable now. So if you enjoy Gangplank, then definitely pick him up. He's probably been in one of the best spots he's been in for general audiences in a while. Riven sits to beta option. Once again, you're not really playing this champion unless you're on one trick of it, so that tends to be where the difference lies. I think she's a fine B tier option, and she tends to be a bit more tailored towards some of these really high AD builds. But you tend to just be a one trick of this champion if you're playing it. If you're not, then it can definitely be a hard pick to learn. She has a lot of unique mechanics, especially utilizing the Q auto and like maximizing damage outputs with this kind of a pick. Garen's been a bit on the weaker side for a while. He definitely sits as more like a mid to high beta option, which for one, he is considered one of the more approachable and like beginner champions of the game. I think he's a bit weak. Obviously, people don't like Garen. That's very clear. The champion can be very frustrating, especially when it's like opting into things like phase rush variants, where it can be really hard to trade back against this champion for a lot of the top lane pool. I think he sits as more like a mid to high beta option at the moment. Probably deserves buffs. Gragas, an elite skew pick, has been for a while. Obviously, very much relies on like utilizing the full effectiveness of his kit to like play lanes, and whether that's just holding lanes, you're playing him as like a neutralizer, whether that's looking for kill threat in lanes and like utilizing the full displacement of his abilities. All that can really equate to the value of this champion, and it's not a pick I'm going to so much recommend for mid and low elo, but for higher elos, I definitely think this is like a good pick to just have within your arsenal. It can really function quite well into a lot of the meta staples. Kled is going to still remain as a high beta option. I think if you're Kled one trick, then you can definitely still make him function this split. I still think he has like a good amount of viability. If you're not playing Kled, like if you're not a Kled one trick, then you're probably still not playing Kled. He's not like meta defining at the moment, and he can be approachable in the likes of the Aatrox matchup. Like if you want a specific counter towards Aatrox, then learning Kled can definitely be something like with value. But if you've got other picks in your arsenal, then Kled isn't really something necessary to learn at the moment. Tryndamere. I haven't really looked at the data for Unital's Tryndamere, so that is definitely something to worth looking at, especially if you play Tryndamere at the moment. Obviously, the builds look to be like your Fleet or your Grasp with Ravenous, where you play around your sustain and just your overall damage potential and isolated 1v1 and split push. Overall, the pick still remains as like a mid to high beta option. If you're comfortable playing Tryndamere, he's still in a pretty good spot. Aurora, for elite, she's still probably my premier pick. I think she really doesn't have many losing matchups when you're very comfortable on the champion. Obviously, things with high mobility and high burst can definitely be a bit more of a struggle for this pick. The likes of Yone and Aurelia are pretty well-known options into her, especially in like your Masters plus Grandmaster kind of area. Those are two of the picks which people definitely look towards more often into this matchup. For average low elo, I think she probably sits as more like a low B tier pick. You're not going to quite get as like the full value value out of this champion's kit, whether that's like the spacing in laning phase, utilizing the full extent of like her movement speed boost and the power of her abilities in lane, combined with the ultimate, which is a very powerful tool if utilized correctly, making like use of the bounce back on the ultimate. There's just lots of like high skill mechanics on this champion. It's just not something I'm really going to recommend for mid to low elo players. Nah, same goes. I think this champion's still very solid and elite. Probably sits as like an S tier pick, one of my recommended go-tos, especially with it within that skill bracket. For average play, sits as more like a B tier pick. You can still definitely make him function, and on like 1-2 items, he can really be very oppressive in side lanes, and a great team fight option if you're able to consistently uphold Mega and find those ultimate angles. Nah, yeah, sits as like a mid B tier pick. Some of the other B tier options. So, Udyr is actually going to move down to the C tier. This pick got pretty heavily hit this patch. In fact, it sits as like a low C tier option. Udyr top has definitely paid for the sins of the strength of Udyr jungle, which has been very strong for a while. Udyr top was obviously utilizing things like Winter's Approach, Liandry's in situations not quite to the same extent as jungle, where it, like Fated Ashes has that like really heavy amplifier towards jungle monsters. Top lane Udyr doesn't benefit from that, obviously, which is why, yeah, things like Unending Despair, Winter's Approach is like a 2-item core. We're looking pretty good on him, but the nerfs towards his ultimate this patch have really hurt him. He definitely sits as more like a low C tier pick now. Same goes for the likes of Skarner. In fact, like Skarner sits as like a C, D tier pick almost, but obviously he's unpopular as hell, and not something I'm going to include on the tier list at the moment because he's just so unpopular. Other picks we've got moving around then. Darius is actually going to move up to the A tier. Darius has really benefited from the three of the most popular champions in the top lane being nerfed. He obviously plays against them quite frequently, and if you're comfortable playing Darius and you're obviously playing him into those matchups, he definitely sits as like a low A tier option now. Other picks which have moved up is Olaf. So Olaf is also going to be within my B tier now. Champions also benefited from some of the popular things being nerfed. Same goes for like a lot of the roster. A lot of things have definitely moved up with the Mordekaiser, the Jax, and the Aatrox nerfs. Jax is actually going to move down to the B tier, so Jax is obviously still a very good elite pick, but for more average play, he definitely sits as more like a mid to low B tier option now. His blind ability just isn't really as as much of a strength here, where comfort definitely rules over like general strength of a champion and like ease of play in a lot of these situations. Ambessa, I'm actually going to leave here, as like the new champions, it's really hard to rate, because in Ambassador's case, it definitely looks like Eclipse into Shojin is like her best 2-item core. Her strength obviously comes from her mobility and strength of like dodging skill shots. I played Tahm Kenshin to her earlier, and if she consistently dodges Tongue Lash, then that can be a really hard matchup for her to play. Overall, not going to rate her yet, but looks to definitely have specific matchups where she can be strong in. Probably not great for the average player, though she does definitely look to have a very high skill ceiling. Continuing on though, Kayle and Sion are going to move up to the A tier. Kayle got buffed this patch, and she's definitely like benefited from those changes. It was attack speed towards her passive, and yeah, she moves up from the B tier to the A tier. She should be an A tier pick for the most part, though, especially within mid and low elo, which is where she is going to be strongest for the most part, where the games go longer and you're less likely to be punished during laning phase. In Sion's case, he's just benefited from some of the champions being nerfed around him. He has been gradually on the rise, and he now moves up to the A tier as a pretty solid option. Poppy got nerfed this patch, so she moves up to the A tier. Poppy obviously had the attack speed ratio, like level 1 attack speed buff, and then they took away some of her base AD to try and like nerf her support. It didn't nerf her at all. She's still like actually strong in both support and actually even stronger in top lane now, where you're going to consistently be autoing utilizing that level 1 attack speed now. So yeah, Poppy moves up to the A tier. Still great in like those counter pick scenarios where you can really utilize the value of W in specific matchups. Not a great blind option. There are definitely like better tank / bruisery picks. Obviously Poppy does have that bruiser variant with like your why can't I think of the item? It'll come to me at some point, but yeah, Poppy has the bruiser variant, and yeah, that can still definitely be quite effective, especially again like when you're snowballing within specific matchups. Kennen moves down to the B tier alongside Silas. It's just more of an elite skewed pick. This champion obviously really benefits when you're making use of the full like kiting capability, the side laning value of the mobility and the like the harass he just has within laning phase. He kind of follows similar trends to the likes of Gnar and Aurora. These three picks are great in elite. Like I think Kennen and Gnar sit as like good S tier picks within like if you want AP or AD. Yeah, both these options are there for you. Aurora sits probably a slight tier above them, but yeah, both these picks more elite skewed. So Kennen, once again drops down from the A tier to the B tier, and Sidus, drops down because of his nerfs. They took away some of his health growth, which is obviously going to be most impactful for top lane. It does obviously impact mid lane and support and jungle, as he's like a 4-way flex pick at the moment. And if you're very comfortable flexing him around in drafts, especially if you're like duo queuing or you're playing him in Clash, for example, then this pick is just something which I would really recommend learning, as he just has so much value with his flexibility within a lot of team comps. But he's slightly nerfed now. You're once again in solo queue going to probably be playing him into the likes of the Malphite matchup and not a huge amount else. The A tier then, a Heimerdinger stays within the A tier. He's still a great AP option. If you're comfortable playing Heimerdinger, then he's definitely there for you. If you're not playing Heimerdinger, then you're probably still not going to play Heimerdinger, as goes for a lot of the picks in this tier list. Jace, I've missed. He stays within the C tier. I've just realised this pick still really struggles at the moment. The itemization system just isn't great for him. He wants to build like lethality options, but a lot of the lethality options just don't really synergize that well with his kit outside of like Grudge, which still feels quite bad as an item at the moment. Edge of Night is probably his favorite option, but then Edge of Night early feels quite bad as an item. So yeah, Jace just in a pretty rough spot at the moment, since it's like a mid to low C tier pick. Continuing on with the A tier, Galio. I still really like Galio as a pick. Definitely something I'm going to recommend for a while as a top lane option. Don't blind him. Utilize him as a counter pick, especially into some of these AP matchups where he can really utilize the effectiveness of a Hollow Radiance Rush combined with the power of his W passive shield. Swain moves up to the B tier. Swain obviously doing a lot better with the buffs he received. I'm, like I said, with the Cassandra changes, not a huge fan with his rework. I think it's kind of missed the mark. Combined with the ultimate feeling quite clunky now, with the recast system on it. I think they should have just kept the fact that it was like a consistent uptime ultimate, as long as you're like within target radius of things. Having the recast just feels quite clunky, and oftentimes you're not even going to end up with these recast scenarios which you like desire in a lot of these situations. He is, however, buffed. He does move up to the B tier as like an okay option. There are different like item choices for him, whether that's like your Rhyalize, your Malignances, your Blackfire Torches, Rush. Malignance looks to be the best, but there are definitely things you have access to. I'd honestly recommend trying out something like Lost Chapter into Rhyalize builds. That might be like one of the routes you can definitely take with him. Teemo stays as an A tier option. Not much to say about this one. He got buffed in 14.21 or 20, I can't remember off the top of my head, and he benefited from that, combined with the item system just being quite nice for him, his scaling, his flexibility. He's a great A tier option. You're not really going to play him outside of like counterpick scenarios, though. He still is strongest in those situations. Wukong moves up to the A tier, like a lower A tier option, but the buffs to him this patch towards his W specifically were really big. A lot of people had realized that W maxing second on Wukong was kind of like the way to go, and now that they've like really reduced that need, the necessariness of it, because of the cooldown being like a base value thing, so it only really impacts him when he's like maxing E second, but it does obviously impact him a lot when you're still maxing W second. It's still definitely something you have the option to do, but Emax second definitely has been opened up as like a route you can go now. Aatrox stays an A tier pick. He got nerfed this patch. He didn't really do much. He still obviously should be going like the Shojin Cyclosword builds. I think that is where a lot of his strength lies, and I've seen a lot more people who start going down that route, but not enough. People should really be like maining on this Spirit Shojin Rush. It looks really good, especially compared to Eclipse, which does obviously function nicely on him, but Shojin Shojin, go it. Singed, going to remain a tier pick. He's still very one trick dependent. You're not really going to see him outside of like one trick scenarios. But if you're utilizing the effectiveness of this champion's kit, being able to like proxy and being able to obviously run through fights and output a lot of DPS, he can be quite valuable. And I think he's a unique pick, especially if you just want to add him to like your arsenal of champions. Trundle. I really like Trundle. I think the buffs to lethal tempo and like the addition of the current lethal tempo are really big for him. And I think he should definitely be played a lot more. He's obviously very unpopular because he's very boring. He is a stat checking AD champion and he wins a lot of matchups in the top lane. So if you're comfortable playing Trundle, play him. If you're not, then I think you're missing out slightly, but he's obviously going to be a very mid to low elo pick. Kind of like a Yorick, but more specifically, would I say he's more specifically good into specific matchups? I think Yorick definitely has some like big counters which can definitely really hurt him, but like Trundle is just like a stat check option with his simplicity is like a great A tier pick. Yorick is still an A tier champion. I'm actually going to have them next to each other. I think both these picks are like great split push options, and if you're comfortable playing either, then you should. If you're not, then once again, you're kind of missing out. But both these picks, pretty good spots at the moment. Cassiopeia and Ryze are my AP options for the A tier. In Ryze's case, I think he's really underrated as a champion, especially into like the short range nature of a lot of the top lane picks. Obviously, he can be susceptible to ganks, which is why you oftentimes go primarily phase rush in the top lane, so you can utilize that movement speed to escape in those situations. But if you ward up correctly, then this pick can be a really effective top laner. Cassiopeia, pretty similar. Her movement speed can obviously be really valuable, and her damage, her like kiting capability, especially into some of those short range matchups, can still be a very potent function of the champion. Set sits as like a mid A tier option. He is there. He is definitely something you can opt into if you need him. He's just a very generic bruiser, and I think he can definitely be valuable in low elo. He definitely tends to be a bit stronger in low elo, which is surprising. Obviously, this champion is very early game skewed, which tends to be a very elite kind of like characteristic. But for the moment, he's definitely doing like all right in low to mid elo, but that's where he tends to be a bit stronger. So sits as an A tier option. Some of the other A tier options then, we have Ornn, Cho'Gath, and Malphite as like my tank options. In Ornn's case, he is still a very good generic go-to as like a tank pick. He scales really well. He does good damage. He's a good tank option. He can abuse a lot of the good itemization at the moment. Obviously, Sunfires and Hollow Radiance are not good in their current states, but in some situations you just have to kind of go for it because you need that wave clear. Obviously, if you don't need that wave clear and you can go for something like a Fimbulwinter, Unending Despair pair, then you should go that. These two items are really good on him at the moment and can definitely like function really nicely as a good like pair, especially when you're able to consistently rotate shields and print health within fights. In Cho'Gath's case, he's just been buffed quite heavily. Like his base damage is really high these days, and overall, he's just in a pretty solid spot at the moment. Some of the tank items can work really nicely on him. He obviously does struggle the higher rank you go, and that can definitely be quite punishing, but he's a good A tier pick. I think if you like Cho'Gath, then you can definitely really go to him as like an option. In Malphite's case, he's a counter pick. He is great into AD matchups. He's terrible into AP matchups, and that is just gonna be how this champion kind of operates. Obviously, the stronger, I mean, he does get buffed every so often and like nerfed every so often, but oftentimes that doesn't really do a huge amount to his matchup tables. It just like nerfs his win rate in a lot of situations. Like just generally like brings his power down. Overall, if you pick him as a counter pick, you should still find the same kind of value you find whenever you really need him as an option. Warwick got changed this patch. I know a lot of Warwick mains have complained. I've seen like complaints about his clunkiness and his attack speed not like working on his first auto when you have W active, which can be frustrating. And if you like want to wait until this champion feels a bit smoother, then that might happen in 14.23. But he's still a solid option. He's still a great A tier go-to, and if you enjoy this kind of a pick, then he's still gonna be there for you. if you're not a fan of work and you'd rather wait until he's a bit less clunky, then yeah, you can wait until 14.23. He's not necessary to learn at the moment, but he is like a good option for your Arsenal. Volibear, still an A tier pick. I think he sits as like a good high A tier option. His simplicity, his like really good dive potential, his damage output, combined with his tankiness in some situations, can all really like benefit him as a pick. He does really require you to get early kills and not fall behind. That is where his biggest weaknesses lie. But if you're comfortable playing Volibear, then yeah, he's still a great option for you. Some of our picks which moved up from the B tier were Aurelia and Renekton. In Aurelia's case, for tower damage, really like benefited her in a way which she was kind of struggling before. Like Aurelia's isolated 1v1 potential, especially with like a minion wave, is still very powerful, and her team fight can be effective, especially if you're able to get like land good ultimates. It can be quite hard though if you're ever really behind, and she just finds strength in a new spot. That's the main thing here. Her split push wasn't great before. Her split push is better now, so it's definitely really helped her, solidifies her as a good A tier option. And Renekton benefited from some of the other popular top laners being nerfed. He moves from the B tier to the A tier. He's still a very generic top laner. Like I'd say Set and Renekton are like your two generic top laners, but they get the job done. And if you enjoy these picks, then you should definitely go towards them. Obviously, Renekton is definitely going to be a bit more potent into elite play. Just being able to have that like point and click CC combined with the mobility and more frontline capability can just be a very potent thing for this kind of a champion. The S tier then. Actually, I'm missing some A tier picks. Alawi got nerfed this patch. She just drops from the high end of the A tier to the low end of the A tier. This pick still very much dominates in a lot of the bruiser matchups and a lot of the tank matchups, and is actually just garbage in range matchups in a lot of situations. And that is just how the champion goes. Play it as a counter pick if you're comfortable on it. If you're not comfortable, it's not as necessary as like the previous patch. Like I would say Alawi was very good in the previous patch as like a counter pick option. This patch though, yeah, she's just a bit weaker. Not necessary, but yeah, can definitely find good results, especially if you're comfortable on it. In Nasus's case, he can function in some of those range matchups, especially if you like kind of like build him in different ways, whether that's like opting into like an Emax variant, which is obviously considerably weaker now. And like you can still function with him on like your base builds with the with your fleets and your Q-maxes. That can still function like perfectly well for him. He did get nerfed in 40.21, which did hurt him a bit. It dropped him from the S tier to more like a mid-A tier pick, but he's still there. It is like a pretty good option. Probably sits like next to Yorick and Trundle as like good stat checker with split push potential. The S tier then. So I have 6 champions here. Zac is still one of my recommended go-tos. He's still a great tank option. Probably the new premier tank pick now, especially with Shen being nerfed, but Mundo and Tarm are both very good options. Honestly, like Tarm, I think for low elo is probably the best option, and then I'd say Mundo in terms of like for low elo, but Zac probably scales for highest in terms of his peaks, especially with like elite play. He works as a great flex option. His damage is very high. His mobility is obviously a bit higher than the other two, and his range, obviously they're all melee, but his Q range and like his range with E just gives him a bit more power, especially in those higher ranks. And Mordekaiser got nerfed this patch. He goes from like a high S tier option to like a low S tier option. He's still a great stats checky AP pick. Probably the best you have like accessible to you, especially within low elo. So yeah, he still maintains the spot in the S tier. And then Urgot is something the champion is great, especially with some of the build variations he has at the moment. Whether that's like your PTAs or your phase rush variants, he still has access to like both trees as like good options for him. And on top of that, the Cleaver Shojin pair works really nicely on him at the moment. You tend to go about standard, and then you can opt into things like Sturks or Overlord's Bloodmail. There's just build variations which you can kind of have access to at the moment. I've missed an item there. It's not coming to me, but yeah, both these build variations can work really nicely on him. I think things like Deadman's can also work really nicely on him. But yeah, I got in a great spot at the moment. And with Shen, I think Shen actually drops down to the A tier now. The nerfs were pretty heavy to him. Really hurts his durability, and his ultimate lost a lot of power. I think One of the nerfs would have been fine. I think it would have kept him as a high A tier option, but both the nerfs have hit him pretty hard. And like the R nerf, yeah, you can definitely feel it. The shield is considerably lower, and you probably want to ult a bit earlier than you would have done in the previous patch, especially if you're looking to arrive at the target and like have them like as a functioning unit, not someone who's just gonna die by the time you arrive in the fight. So yeah, Shen gonna be a bit weaker now, sits as more like a mid to low A tier option. And then yeah, those are my thoughts on the top lane tier list. I think if you want an S plus pick, I think Tahm Kench is great. I really like, as a personal pick, I think Tahm Kench is the great, is like one of the greatest low elo options you have accessible to you at the moment. I think his damage is incredibly deceptive. I think he, as a tank option, he's just great. He doesn't scale well in low elo. It's like a high elo option. So that is something you do just have to be aware of. Like, people are just going to understand how to play against this pick more consistently. But as like an abusive low elo tank pick, then yeah, Tahm Kench is he is a great S plus option. I think he is probably my recommended go-to at the moment. And then Ambassador, I'm not going to rate, but she probably sits like as a low C, maybe D tier pick for low elo. She'll probably end up getting the Cassante treatment where she'll get adjusted 100 times and still not be in a good spot, but we'll have to see. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.